Today we tackle one of the most talked about cases in hip-hop, the Max B murder case. We have taken our time and compiled everything we have found into this video. We are not here trying to discredit anyone, we are simply presenting the facts as we know them to be. This is a true Street Docs exclusive.
The Max B case. How a botched hotel robbery turned into a 75-year sentence. And then 20. When people talk about Max B, they usually talk about the Wave. The Harlem rapper, born Charlie Wingate in 1978, helped pioneer a loose, melodic street style that influenced artists from French Montana to A$AP Rocky. But for nearly 2 decades, his name has been tied just as tightly to a very different storyline. A 2006 robbery at a New Jersey hotel that left one man dead and put Max behind bars for years. This is the case laid out in court records, news coverage, and later appeals. How a planned robbery inside a Fort Lee Holiday Inn turned fatal. How a jury saw Max's role. Why he was originally sentenced to 75 years. How that conviction was later vacated. And how he ultimately walked out of prison in November 2025 after a plea deal to aggravated manslaughter. Background. The people at the center of the case. The Fort Lee case doesn't revolve around Max alone. 3 names keep appearing across court documents and news coverage. Charlie Max B. Wingate, Harlem rapper, accused by prosecutors of planning the robbery but not physically being at the hotel when the shooting happened. Gina Conway, his then-girlfriend, who would become the state's key cooperating witness. Kelvin, or Kevin Leerdam, Max's stepbrother, sometimes described as his brother-in-law, accused of being the gunman. The victims at the hotel were Alan J. Plowden, the target of the robbery, described in coverage and testimony as a flashy figure who often carried large amounts of cash. David Taylor Jr., Plowden's associate. He was shot and killed during the robbery. 2 women, Giselle Neves and Mate Castro, were also present and became important witnesses. Understanding the dynamics between these people is key to understanding how the case was built. The night of the crime, Fort Lee Holiday Inn, September 2006. The setup. According to the 2012 New Jersey appellate opinion in State v. Wingate and contemporary reporting, the story starts when Gina Conway meets Alan Plowden in New York. She learns he has substantial cash on him and shares that information with Max. Prosecutors later told jurors that Max devised a plan. Conway would lure Plowden, and Max would send Conway and Leerdam to rob him in his hotel room in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Court records describe Max arranging transportation for them to cross from New York into New Jersey. The plan, as laid out by the state, Conway was the bait and insider. Leerdam was the muscle and armed enforcer. Max, while staying in New York, was the planner who expected to benefit from the robbery proceeds. Inside the Holiday Inn. The events of the night of September 22nd and 23rd, 2006 are reconstructed largely through Conway's later testimony and the appellate court's summary. Plowden and his associate David Taylor Jr. checked into the Holiday Inn on Route 4 in Fort Lee, together with 2 women, Neves and Castro. After going out, they returned to the hotel. Plowden hid most of his cash, jewelry, and keys under the liner of a trash can in his room and went to bed with Neves. Taylor and Castro stayed in a separate room in the same hotel. Conway and Leerdam then arrived at the hotel. They went to Plowden's room. Neves opened the door. Leerdam, armed, forced his way in. Neves was bound with duct tape. Plowden was also restrained. The intruders demanded money. Plowden told them the cash wasn't in the room and was instead with his associate Taylor. Under pressure, Plowden called Taylor and told him to come to the room. The shooting. When Taylor arrived at the door, things escalated sharply. According to the appellate summary, a struggle broke out between Taylor and Leerdam over the gun. During that struggle, the firearm discharged, and Taylor was fatally shot. Conway then took money from Taylor's pockets, about $800, according to the record, while Leerdam took a watch from his wrist. Conway also grabbed Neves' purse. The pair fled, leaving Taylor dead on the floor and Plowden still duct-taped. Plowden called the front desk for help. When police responded, they found Taylor's body, and also caught Plowden trying to move around $30,000 in cash out of the room, leading to his own separate charges for money laundering and identity theft. The investigation. How Max B was connected within days of the murder, detectives focused on Conway. On September 28, 2006, she was arrested and gave a statement implicating both Max and Leerdam, telling police that the robbery had been planned and that she and Leerdam were carrying out Max's orders. Her cooperation was critical. As one local report later summarized, Conway said she and Leerdam forced their way into the room and bound the victims following orders from Wingate. On January 9, 2007, Max B was remanded to Bergen County Jail on $2 million bail, charged in connection with the robbery and murder despite not having physically entered the hotel that night. The theory behind the charges was built around felony murder and conspiracy. Under New Jersey law, if someone dies during the commission of certain felonies, like armed robbery, those who plan or participate in the underlying crime can be held responsible for the death, even if they did not pull the trigger. So legally, the state did not have to prove that Max personally handled the weapon. They had to show that he orchestrated a robbery that foreseeably led to a killing. The trial, State v. Wingate, 2009. Conway's plea and cooperation. Before Max's trial, Gina Conway made her own deal. In January 2009, she pleaded guilty to manslaughter and armed robbery and agreed to testify for the prosecution. She faced a maximum of 18 years under that agreement. Her testimony became the backbone of the state's narrative, that Max was the mastermind who sent her and Leerdam on a robbery mission. The courtroom proceedings, Max B. and Kelvin Leerdam were tried together in Bergen County Superior Court. The trial began in May 2009. The prosecution presented Conway's detailed description of the planning and execution of the robbery, phone records showing communication between Max and the others around the time of the crime, testimony from the hotel victims and police who responded to the scene. The defense, in turn, challenged Conway's credibility, highlighting that she had cut a deal to save herself. They argued that Max was being overcharged as a planner for a crime he did not physically commit, and that Conway had motivation to shift blame onto him. The verdict. On June 9, 2009, the jury found both Max B. and Leerdam guilty on 9 of 11 counts, including felony murder, conspiracy to commit robbery, kidnapping, armed robbery. In effect, the jury accepted the prosecution's theory that Max, even from outside the hotel, held significant responsibility for the crime because he initiated and organized it. The original sentences, 75 years, life, and 15 years. Sentencing took place in September 2009, and the outcomes for the 3 core defendants were starkly different. Max B., Charlie Wingate, sentenced to 75 years in prison. At the time, reports noted that he would not be eligible for parole until 2042. Kelvin Leerdam, sentenced to life in prison plus 35 years, reflecting his role as the gunman. Gina Conway, sentenced to 15 years under her plea deal after cooperating and testifying against Max and Leerdam. Coverage at the time described the verdict and sentences as major victories for Bergen County prosecutors. For Max B., effectively in his early 30s, a 75-year sentence was widely seen as a de facto life sentence. Appeals in the 2012 appellate decision. Max B.'s legal team appealed his conviction, arguing among other points that the trial court made errors in evidentiary rulings and that certain charges should have merged for sentencing. Those arguments were reviewed in the 2012 appellate decision in State v. Wingate. In that opinion, the New Jersey Appellate Division recounted the facts of the case in detail, upheld the convictions, left the 75-year sentence in place. For several years after, public information suggested Max would remain in prison to serve out the bulk of that term, consistent with felony murder sentencing norms in New Jersey at the time. A turning point, post-conviction relief, and the 2016 plea deal. The major shift in the case came later, not through a direct appeal, but through post-conviction relief. By the mid-2010s, Max had a new legal team that raised questions about his original trial representation, including claims that his trial attorney had a conflict of interest. According to later reporting and summaries of the case, a judge ultimately agreed that there were issues significant enough to vacate the original conviction and reopen the door for a new outcome. Rather than go through a full retrial on all the original charges, the parties reached a plea agreement. The new plea. In September 2016, Max B. pleaded guilty to aggravated manslaughter, a lesser offense than felony murder. Under the terms of the New Deal, the original 75-year sentence was replaced by a 20-year sentence. Crucially, he received credit for the years he had already served since his 2006 arrest and 2007 remand. Some outlets reported that under the recalculated sentence, his adjusted potential release date was set in the late 2020s, making freedom a realistic prospect rather than a distant abstraction. The case did not disappear. Leardam's life sentence and Conway's 15-year term remained, but Max's position changed dramatically. Life in prison and ongoing musical output. Throughout his incarceration, Max B maintained a presence in hip-hop culture. While his legal status remained complex, he continued to record and release music in various forms. The album Vigilante Season, released in 2011, helped keep his cult following alive. He appeared on projects associated with French Montana and was credited as a writer voice on Kanye West's The Life of Pablo. From behind bars, he also communicated periodically through phone calls and messages that were shared with fans, insisting on his innocence in the sense of not having killed anyone and presenting himself as a victim of an over-aggressive prosecution, even while the manslaughter plea stood. The legal reality, however, was clear. Even with the reduced 20-year sentence, Max remained in the custody of New Jersey's Department of Corrections, serving time in facilities including Northern State Prison. Release, November 9, 2025. The final piece of the story, at least in a custodial sense, arrived in November 2025. Multiple outlets, including music and mainstream news publications, reported that Max B was released from prison on November 9, 2025, after serving about 16 years behind bars following his 2006 arrest and the subsequent conviction. The reporting is consistent on several major points. He walked free after the combination of his 2016 sentence reduction and credit for time served effectively satisfied the 20-year term earlier than its nominal end date. His longtime collaborator French Montana publicly celebrated his release, sharing posts welcoming Max home. He remains on parole-supervised release for several years, consistent with New Jersey practice for such sentences. In a human interest angle, some outlets also highlighted that Max had married while incarcerated and that he marked his release by presenting his wife with a new ring, framing his freedom as the start of a new personal chapter. People. Calm legal and cultural significance of the case felony murder and mastermind liability. From a legal perspective, the Max B case is a textbook example of how felony murder and conspiracy doctrines work in many U.S. states. You can receive a severe sentence, even life-equivalent time, without ever pulling the trigger if prosecutors prove you planned, directed, or materially participated in a dangerous felony where someone was killed. That principle guided the 2009 verdict and 75-year sentence, even though Conway and Leardam physically entered the room and Leardam fired the fatal shot. Post-conviction relief as a safety valve. The later vacating of his conviction and reduction to aggravated manslaughter shows another side of the justice system. The role of post-conviction review. Judges can revisit old cases when serious questions arise regarding fairness of representation or conflicts of interest. In Max's situation, the court did not declare him innocent of involvement. Instead, it found procedural concerns serious enough to justify a new outcome, which led to the negotiated 20-year manslaughter plea. The artist versus the case culturally. The Max B case sits in the long, complicated history of rappers facing serious criminal charges while simultaneously influencing a music scene. His wavy, melodic style has been cited by later artists as an influence, even during his long absence from the free world. The case itself predates the more recent debates about prosecutors using rap lyrics directly as evidence, but it still fits into a broader conversation about how artists' lives and criminal allegations intersect in the public imagination. A clear timeline. September 22nd, 23rd, 2006. Robbery at the Holiday Inn in Fort Lee, NJ. David Taylor Jr. is shot and killed. Alan Plowden later charged separately with financial crimes. September 28, 2006. Gina Conway is arrested. Gives a statement implicating Max B. and Kelvin Leardam. January 9, 2007. Max B. is remanded to Bergen County Jail on $2 million bail. January 2009. Conway pleads guilty to manslaughter and armed robbery. Agrees to testify. May-June 2009. Trial of Max B. and Leerdam. Both are convicted on 9 of 11 counts, including felony murder. September 3, 2009. Max is sentenced to 75 years. Leerdam to life plus 35 years. September 4, 2009. Conway is sentenced to 15 years. 2012, New Jersey. Appellate Division upholds Max's conviction and sentence. September 16, 2016, approx. After post-conviction litigation, Max's original conviction is vacated. He pleads guilty to aggravated manslaughter and receives a 20-year sentence with credit for time served. November 9, 2025, Max B. is released from prison after about 16 years of incarceration. He remains on parole supervision for several years. Conclusion. The Max B. case is a layered story. A violent robbery that ended in a man's death. A prosecution that pursued not just the gunman, but the alleged mastermind. A harsh 75-year sentence later reduced after questions about legal representation. And a rapper who continued to influence music while behind bars. Stripped of myths and rumors, the factual record shows a system that first delivered one of its most severe penalties, and then, years later, revisited that outcome through the mechanisms of post-conviction relief and plea bargaining. Today, Max B. is free, but the Fort Lee Holiday Inn robbery remains a central chapter in both his biography and the broader conversation about crime, accountability, and hip-hop in America.